Hi, everyone. Welcome back to New York City. This is Dave Vellante with Scott Hebner, and you're watching theCUBE's coverage of AWS Financial Services Symposium, the 10th. Since 2015, this company, Amazon Web Services, has really ascended in the financial services community, and we're really pleased to have Paul Davis here. He's the field CTO at JFrog. Thanks for making some time for us, Paul.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're talking software supply. Be honest with me. When was the first time you heard the term software supply chain?
Today.
Oh, really? Okay. So it goes back to the early part of this century. And Gary McGraw's work, I don't know who he is, Maven Central, you may know what that is. It's largely confined to security conferences and trade journals. And then 2014 to 2018, the Target HVAC breach, that was 2014, and the Equifax Apache Struts incident, 2017, introduced the idea of supplier risk. Okay. And then 2019, Capital One, cloud config breach, blah, 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 NIST. But when I first heard about it was SolarWinds, which was 2020. So December 2020, malware inserted during the vendor's own build process. Here you are thinking you're patching, doing the right thing, and this insidious malware comes in, and then President Biden's executive order, and then the Log4j, and then it's become really a critical part of the cybersecurity conversation. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is people don't realize that like 80% of the software that is used to build software is actually written by somebody else. We talk about third-party code and first-person code. That 80% means you're pushing 80% of your risk to somebody you don't really know. And so you've got to have controls around that. And obviously, as security people, we have a little problem where we can't say no to risk. If there's a problem and nobody else sticks their hands up and says, I'll protect you, the CISOs typically go, yes, I'll do it. And so supply chain became that. And then we talked about vulnerabilities and CVEs and all that sort of stuff. That raised the profile. And the fact it's business impacting, it's almost like we were surprised that all of a sudden there's this new threat area that we weren't thinking about. And so it becomes complicated.
And the way historically a lot of organizations would deal with it was paper, like contracts that say you won't do that, right? Yes, okay, great. And just like a checkbox item. And you report that up, to the board. Yeah, our supply chain is secure. And in reality, it's not. And cyber insurance, came into the fore, and they said, no. This is not, okay, we still haven't solved the problem, but that's what JFrog is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the process where I've been a CISO for large organizations, and a lot of them, they've just signed the policy standard guidelines that they wanted to follow without actually reading them, without trying to understand their obligations. And now in today's world, people are realizing they've got a risk.
So in the old days, a long time ago, when I was the product management leader for Rational Softwares, remember them?
Oh my, wow.
I was at IBM. We used to talk about the software component lifecycle.
Yes.
So is the software supply chain different than that? It seems like this has more of a
definitely
regulatory and security tracking to auditability versus managing the actual.
Well, it's like you're saying, you've got open source, you've got third-party software, you've got components, you've got microservices, you've got custom code. I mean,
it all really does come down to, the business impact. I focus on the business impact of bad software, whether it's trust, regulatory compliance, just the ability to stop doing so many changes, change windows or incidents or audit findings. Those are all business impacting, and it's only now, like our aware, it's not only now, but it's recently, like the past sort of 8 years, we've realized that it's become a problem. And now we're dealing with it. And thankfully, a lot of organizations are dealing with it and starting to look about how they can protect it. But we have had this terrible capability or challenge of doing point solutions. Right. Oh, I've got this problem, buy that, problem this. And now we've got all these multiple tools, whatever, which is really chaotic. Because the more tools you have, the more complex it is to actually measure and track and manage risk.
Imagine it gets even more complex with the world of AI agents, where they come from everywhere. And so the visibility and the traceability of how all these things come together, not just agent to agent, but all the underlying software that I could imagine it's all over the place, different origins. You need to understand what you're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when we talk about security, we used to say, well, the problems happen when we involve humans. Now with AI, we've got this problem of we've got now another type of thing which can do automated actions that we're not aware of. And how do we control that? So we're now, I as a CISO, I used to have a rule which is 3 strikes you're out. 3 security things and you're out of wherever I am. you can't really do that with an AI agent. You can't fire the AI agent. You can shut it down, but then business says that's a problem, we need it back. And so how do you protect yourself against that?
So this idea of tools creep, with our partner ETR, we track this stuff. We've done now 2 annual surveys just ahead of RSA, and we found that there's at least some evidence that tools creep is slowing down. I'll put it that way. It's not, and there's a big theme in the industry, as you know, about consolidating tools. Only about 6% of the I don't know, 1,800, maybe it's not that big, maybe it was like 800, I guess, folks that we surveyed, said they were able to consolidate their tool stack, the number of vendors in their tools stack, and it's the security stack. And so, but there is evidence that it's slowing down. And then you have, these big companies, certainly Microsoft, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, to a certain extent Zscaler, maybe partnering with like a CrowdStrike, trying to build that consolidation team. Brings me to AWS, which is interesting because unlike Microsoft, who really monetizes security in a big way and competes very heavily with the likes of CrowdStrike and Palo, AWS really more focuses on the infrastructure. They have Security Lake, they have Security Hub, but they leave a lot of room for third parties to add value. So how do you think about the AWS ecosystem? Where do you guys fit? How do you fit into some of the infrastructure, I'll call it, that AWS provides?
So just like you talked about those other vendors producing like this consolidation, this path for consolidation. So JFrog is doing the same thing for developers. So we call it like the platform play, the end-to-end. Important thing, we need to have process, because Forrester a couple of weeks ago said platforms won't work unless you have process. Interesting.
Interesting comment. Yeah.
But from the point of view of AWS, we run in, a lot of our customers use our product inside their environment to get that single point of truth around binaries, to be able to tell whether they're malicious or safe, or whether there's licensing issues or operational risk. But it enables you to get that new perspective of end-to-end platform, right? As I call it, layers of defense. Sounds familiar to the other products, but I can do layers of defense now for software development. So from the design phase through to the developers, through to as it starts to roll into production. And so providing that framework means that we can take the other tools and integrate them and remove those gaps in the visibility and get what I call the traceability. So I can actually see where a package comes from, who developed it, and it's what I call like genealogy. It's life history of how it got into production, what was approved, what was it, what was blocked, is it safe, what were the other evidences that were associated with that particular release. Very important.
So when you take your SDLC,
yes,
you plug in JFrog, perhaps you use AWS Outposts, and then not only within that one SDLC, but it can support a hybrid environment across your enterprise where things are developed in different places. Is that the idea of how that all comes together?
Yeah, there is this need to have a sort of a single point of truth regarding your binaries, right? It just reduces costs, it improves speed, and it also reduces risk. Mm-hmm. So we support that. So when you say like points, we support like over 40 different packages now, package types. So the fun part is the transformation of getting the teams to migrate to that. And a lot of customers are doing that now, but it's still an ongoing thing that has to happen. And talk about the tools consolidation. I spend a lot of time working with customers, helping them understand where their tools are, where their mapping is, and where their gaps are.
So don't hate me for asking this question. I apologize if it's like trivial, but would you put yourself in a posture management category, or is it more sort of shift left dev security? Okay,
because we've got a broad journey, it's shift left and shift right. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say like we're like an ASPM, like right. Posture management. However, the data that we have
can support that.
Yeah. Like, first of all, I can tell you whether this software is supposed to be there. Is that a rogue app? Or is somebody going to tweak it or bypass the process? Because in security, we trust, or we used to say trust and verify. I don't follow that. Verify, and maybe trust, because I'm paranoid, okay?
Don't trust.
Yeah. Okay, don't trust. But you need to have that ability to have that. So when audit comes along and says, where did this application come from? You can go back and say, here's the build process, here's all the stages, here's the quality control scanning we did, this is how it rolled up into the infrastructure, this is the data feeding into the AWS tools, etc. That all feeds there. So you can have a more 360 sort of model for, because remember, security for me, ignorance is not bliss. It's the unknowns that hurt.
And so how does that relate to the AWS security?
Well, we can feed data into that, right?
Gotcha. So
yeah, because the thing is, it's like a sort of, if you want to make a CISO happy, say we can give you more visibility. And the one thing, I mean, I've met over, I don't know, a large number of CISOs last year, right? And we all want to work with the developers. We all want to get the data there because we're talking about CVEs, we're talking about risk. And a lot of them are sort of trying to get integrated with that development lifecycle and get the developers to become effectively security, an extension of security.
So I want to push on that because I feel like when cloud really ascended,
yes,
it became the first line of defense. Yes. And then people realized, oh, this is a shared responsibility model. Oh, I can't just put my data in the cloud and sleep at night. And so I think it was not well understood by many organizations early on. And then to your point, the CISO was essentially responsible through the development organization for securing the data and the apps. And so the app dev folks had to become SecOps pros, which they probably didn't want to do, which is a great business case for JFrog, right? And so, and then you got audit over, looking over your shoulder. It's kind of the last line of defense. And so the question is, what's the industry doing generally, and JFrog specifically? And I think you've touched a lot on this to make the CISO's life easier and the app dev life easier.
I go back to data. It's funny. I'm seeing an interesting trend now where a lot of times, like the DevSecOps model has been run by the development team. Right, it's kind of fun. But now security teams are starting to saying, hold on a second, you're defining policy? You're doing waivers? Excuse me, no, that's what we do. And so they're starting to get sort of almost what might say territorial about it and saying, no, we have to work together on this. I have a risk register. I have to report risk to the board, etc. We need to work together. You can't do this independently. And that kind of synergy between the two organizations is happening. It's funny, I was at another conference recently, and I was a bit cruel. I took a developer and convinced him he was a security professional in 15 minutes. He hated me, but as I describe it, developers are good hackers. You give them a technology, you give them a problem, say find a solution.
So as part of that software supply chain, the machine learning models, the LLMs, talk to me a little bit about the AI part of this.
Well, AI, the acceleration of AI has been fun to grip your hands onto the edge of the thing and keep your hands on and grip there. The thing for me is that the attackers have realized that the developers and now the data scientists are people they can attack. So now we're starting to see, with the explosion of new LLMs every day, that some of them are turning bad, malicious, or if I get my marketing, have weaponized LLMs, but basically just the act of downloading an LLM can cause it to launch malicious code. Just the fact of doing an install can cause that. Then you add on to it the fact that these models are all over the place, and a lot of companies are still trying to work out where it's used, right? And so that whole thing of traceability, knowing who's doing the work and not being surprised, is a key thing. And so we first of all, we have a threat intel team that last year started doing the scanning of Hugging Face LLMs, right?
Oh boy.
And we discovered a number of bad ones, and we've also proven that we're good at it. We publish it. Yeah, in fact, recently we just announced a partnership with Hugging Face, so we're now one of the sources of intel. So when you go to Hugging Face saying this is malicious, and then we show you all the data behind it.
Because ignorance is not bliss.
Yeah. You got it. Hey, I've converted you. Are you a hacker or not?
That's great, because what they got, approaching 1 million models sitting out there in open source and stuff like that. Well, so how does this all work with Amazon SageMaker?
We're fully integrated with them, to be honest, and so we have that partnership to make it to help facilitate that, and it's a growing partnership. We're adding, I can't talk about some of the things coming out, but they are that partnership is growing, so we can provide additional security,
which allows you to tap into the open source models on how you interface
Yes.
with a greater, or I guess a lower risk profile. Okay.
The other part I must add in is that if you think about the libraries that support LLMs, those are open source, TensorFlow, PyTorch, and we have seen situations where they have turned bad, or they've got vulnerabilities or 0 days that people don't worry about. And that's one of the things we can do is there's a requirement in the financial sector to do continuous scanning. It doesn't mean we literally scan all the time, but we update our database multiple times a day, and we can say, there's a new 0 day come out in your package that you've just pushed 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. How do you respond?
Okay, so it's not 24/7 by 365, but you do it taking, granular snapshots.
Multiple times a day, we're doing updates to that database.
So a lot of conversation here at this conference about agentic AI. You're empowering business users. There's low code, no code environments.
Yes.
So the notion of shadow, AI or shadow agents or whatever. So, which obviously becomes part of your software supply chain, right?
Yes.
So that's where I was going before on this whole notion of that with the outposts and stuff, you can support a distributed hybrid environment, right? Because that seems to be an emerging problem if more and more end users are creating their own software.
I mean, this is
workflow.
This is the fun thing. It's like I have a joke. How do you detect if source code is being generated by Gen AI? It's documented.
With periods.
yeah. So from that perspective, I think it's a challenge. I think part of it is I've done a lot of work using Gen AI to generate code, and it's getting better. It's like recently asked it to generate code, and it didn't include the password inside the code. It actually referenced an environmental parameter, which was like, wow, it's amazing. But I think this is something that is going to require discipline. I've had the whole thing with agentic AI and was two parts. Code generation, you need to have human oversight. You can't just rely upon and pushing code out. Yes, it can accelerate, and as we've been hearing at the conference, we have seen developer efficiency grow with their ability to generate code. I find it invaluable. I can program in 12 languages. I can't remember how to write something in C and then move to Perl and then move to Python. I can just say, hey, convert this, and I read it and go, add this in, and then it's good. So it needs oversight, and I think that's valuable as an inspirational model. Then we've got agentic, which scares the living daylights out of me, to be honest, because we need additional controls to monitor, like at a transaction level, what are the outputs? And I have suggested recently that we need an AI engine to monitor agentic AI. So we need AI to monitor AI to see exceptions, because they're running at machine speed. Because in the financial sector, we're doing transactions, if we're doing a stock exchange, that massive transactions per minute. Human can't keep up with that, right? So we need something to have guardrails. But because agentic AI has, every time it does it slightly differently. The outputs matter.
Do you engage with chief AI officers? Let me preface that with some thoughts that I've been hearing as I've been talking to people. Is that the chief AI officer traditionally has been a business technical guy.
Yeah.
More people are talking about, well, they're actually kind of the head of the digital HR department for the digital work, which is a cute way of saying that they're responsible for governing what agents get deployed. And that's not in the development or CI, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in that organization, sort of a digital HR group.
Yeah.
I would think this would be really valuable to make sure that any agents that get deployed across the organization that end users can then put into workflows meets all this criteria of traceability and visibility, right?
Yeah, I'm probably going to make a career blocking method. I'd hate to be that person.
Yes.
It's like, the average tenure of a CISO is about 18 months. It's been like that for years. I will... To put my destiny in the hands of an agent and say there's not going to be a problem. And that's one of the funny things about security is many industries have a sort of contingency or risk budget. Security, there is none. You get it right, and if you fail, out. So from that perspective, it's scary. So we have teams. We have a team focused on AI. We actually acquired last year Quack, and we've got we've been advancing that because we see a lot of synergies between MLSecOps or MLOps and DevOps or DevSecOps, and that synergy. So we have a team that's got the experience and knowledge, and we're growing that expertise. But the idea of I love the digital HR. I think that is a brilliant analogy. It kind of scares me because I'm paranoid, but I think it is. But the fact that you can't always consistently predict what it's going to do.
Right.
It's like, I mean,
or how it's used by people that are assembling the workflows. And by the way, your job is to be paranoid, so good.
yeah, yes. I mean,
More
I'm still
paranoid, the
living.
better.
Is there I always felt like it used to be failure equals fire, and then that changed kind of mid last decade because people are like, well, they're going to get in. And so there seemed to be a little bit more, patience. Are you saying that's changing now, that the CISO's lifespan is maybe not shortening, but it's there's less patience?
I don't know. To be honest, as a person who's lasted than the 18 months tenure, I have had some really fun incidents, and where the actual failure became a success, where we were more engaged with the business, more involved in the risk management.
Right.
I think it's really how you present yourself. It's like one of the things I always say about security is we're advisors. It's the business that has to accept the risk. Our job is to articulate as much of the risk and say, look, this is what we can do. But in the end, we're not buzzing about this, but, you really want to do this? Yeah. And then at the end, when they say yes, we have to let go and just put the mitigating controls in place.
And bad human behavior trumps good security every time, right? I mean, we've seen that.
To earth be human.
Right, exactly. So speaking of agentic, I'm looking at a slide that Scott Mullins put up this morning.
Yeah.
Financial institutions are generating value with agents. Some good logos on there: ADP, Moody's, Rocket, Robinhood, etc. Crypto.com. But there are only 12. Now, we know AWS. If this were mature, there'd be like 1,200.
Yes.
You wouldn't be able to read the slide. So it's early days still. But where are we in that?
So we're kind of going through this weird sort of model of, okay, we got Gen AI, right? Still learning that. Now we got agents. Everybody loves agents, right? The whole industry, agents everywhere. Now somebody's come up with agentic AI and then MCP, which also scares me as well, right? I just means I can get on a plane, isn't it, really? But no, but agentic AI is great from the perspective of, I think if you have the guardrails in place and that ability to monitor not just at the technical level, how many requests, what are the questions, but also the outputs, I think is key. I think that will make a difference. But I think it's still got a journey. Like the A2A protocol that was recently released, I love that because it's actually a secure protocol for agents to talk to each other. Now, the scary part of that protocol was also the fact it also supports long-running jobs. What is a long-running job? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So that. And then you've got MCP from Anthropic, which also scares me because it's. Have you heard of a product called Zapier?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like Zapier for AI. Yeah. It's plug and play. But there's no assurance around that person who wrote that engine. Did they do something good or bad? And as was mentioned this morning, perhaps you could write it yourself better, than you could than that person.
So, MCP seems to be gaining at least some traction in terms of, MCP, there's a competing standard, I guess, that Google has put out. But okay. But at the same time, for agentic to work, you need things like MCP, right? So this is like...
Well, yes. Or you could write it yourself. It's a question of whether you trust it or not. How much risk?
Just saying you don't need it. It just facilitates greater adoption and, of course, greater risk.
You can move faster, but it's a bit like, moving faster and then removing the brakes.
What it comes down to is just the reality that if you're going to be employing agents, and you look at different studies, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, just to name a couple, half the people that are deploying agentic workflows are going to acquire their agents externally from providers and wire them together. MCP is the way to wire them together.
Yes.
So you may be identifying a big area that needs focus, which is securing not only the supply chain of software that goes between those, but the actual MCP. Is that what you're...
Yeah. That's what I worry about, because I love, I like to move fast. I like to develop fast. I've been doing machine learning for many years, and I've been doing the agentic stuff and trying to get it to what it wanted to do, and it doesn't yet. So I'm still fighting that battle, to be honest. But MCP, I think it's a great sort of step in the journey. But until got security, I wouldn't want... I'm not really shooting myself in the foot, but wouldn't want to roll it into production yet.
But don't you help address that problem with visibility and traceability? Is that part of your value proposition? This kind of chaos would be music to your ears, no?
Well, we can sort of get the traceability, but what happens in production, we don't have those controls.
Right.
We have to rely, and that it's funny with AI and everything. There's so many new attack vectors, filtration attacks, guardrails, DDoSing. Just manipulation. It's a whole new set of protocol tools out there. I was at RSA a couple of weeks ago, and there's more AI tools than I wanted to think about.
Yeah, I know.
So the fact that they're non-deterministic means dynamic, right? Which means it's kind of hard to monitor what's going on every day versus how you design it on paper.
Yeah.
It was at RSA too, and somebody said, well, what about quantum? Are you concerned about quantum? And the respondent said, the hackers, they don't need quantum. They're doing fine, just fine without it.
I had a similar question, how does quantum, and what I worked at, I couldn't work out how it tracked into the traceability. But I do have some customers where they want to sign their binary, so it only runs in their network. And if you could get that key and then insert your own binary, you'd be blind. Unless you had the controls to say, hey, this is a rogue app, because the checksum changed. But quantum, I think, the post-quantum cryptography is going to get interesting. It's a lot of infrastructure pain. How it logs into, I was sitting there trying to work out where somebody changed the key, it would immediately stand out in our model, because JFrog's keyed on, every binary has a unique set of keys. So it just, and so if somebody changes it, it immediately sticks out and says, this is different.
Well, it certainly sounds like a big step forward to, I was, just thinking about like the integration with SageMaker, that you go out into Hugging Face and you can start selecting these open source models and bring them in, and there's a much greater degree of security and traceability around that.
Yeah.
That's a big step forward, I think.
Yeah.
To addressing this, right? But MCP, that's another whole.
As I said, it's another fun subject.
It is fun.
Yeah. I must admit, one thing I don't do is I don't remember my dreams. So when I wake up in the morning, I don't remember the nightmares. So maybe I'm dreaming at MCP and I don't know about it.
There is a security element to it, but it may not be. You're sparking me to go look into it more. But the question is, I think you're more on how robust is it, one, and then the whole supply chain that feeds it of software or agents is another dimension of complexity here.
I think MCP is a great thing. It's just we need controls.
Well, historically in our industry, it may not be the case for financial services, although it may be, but historically, value creation trumps good security. People will go after the revenue and the productivity and the competitiveness, and we got to secure this thing. And maybe that'll change with AI, but based on this conversation, I'm not sure.
What about, so we're here at this conference, financial services, a lot of compliance and policy. So how does this feed into that?
Wow.
In other words, how is it contributing to these firms meeting their compliance mandates? That's around AI in particular.
I think for me, the financial sector has always been great at regulatory compliance. However, the regulatory compliance landscape is changing. It's like in Europe, they got teeth on their things, the AI regulations. Yeah, right. Did you hear about the product warranty update recently?
No.
They removed liability and included software in product liability.
Oh boy.
So an end of life. There's a whole journey onto that.
Fun time.
Yeah. So if you're doing business over in Europe, you've not got to worry about that. And I think the other thing we have a challenge is AI is a moving target, because every state is coming up with its own laws around it. It's like PII, but we have AII regulations, and what do we do there?
There was down in Delaware in the United States a couple of years ago, a fiduciary court ruled that corporate officers can no longer hide behind, well, AI told me to do it. They're personally responsible.
Wow.
And which is going to drive even greater focus on compliance and policy and explainability. And so you're right. The regulations is like changing all the time, and keeps you guys in business.
Two-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
The companies that can afford to do it will do it. And some of the smaller guys that don't have the resources, they'll either try to skirt or they'll be in trouble.
I thought you were giving me a glimmer of hope around the liability insurance that most CISOs have to have. That's not quite there yet.
Listen, Paul, thanks so much for coming on theCUBE. Really appreciate your time and your insights. All right. For Scott Hebner, this is Dave Vellante. You're watching theCUBE's coverage of AWS Financial Services Symposium from New York City 2025. We'll be right back right after this short break.